Hello, my dear friends. We are continuing to learn the second chapter of the laws of reciting the Shema today, where we're going to be learning all about how we are supposed to recite the Shema. So the Rambam begins by telling us that if a person recites the Shema, but in the first verse, Hear, O Israel, Shema Yisrael, they are not thinking, they don't have the right intention, they don't think about what they're saying, so then they have not fulfilled their obligation of reciting the Shema. But the rest of the Shema, the other chapters, the other 3 chapters of the Shema, so then even if a person wasn't thinking of every word of what they're saying, they're still going to fulfill their obligation. Now, what about if a person is going on he's going on a trip, he's going somewhere, he's walking, or he's just standing or lying down? So then a person is allowed to recite the Shema in any form of how they are. That's totally fine, as long as they're not lying in more of a too leisurely way, more like lying on their back with their face up. So that's not a proper way of reciting the Shema, but rather a person should turn on their side. If a person is very obese and it's a little bit harder for them, so then even just a little bit to turn, just to show a sign of respect. And if a person is walking, so then the person should stop walking to say the first verse, just Shema Yisrael, that first verse, and then he can continue walking to recite the rest of Shema. If a person is sleeping, so then we should wake them up so that they should recite the Shema. It's our responsibility because that person is sleeping right now. If we don't wake him up, he's not going to recite the Shema. It's a mitzvah that is passing. Now, if a person is working, so he's hired by he's hired by the person who hired them, and now they have to recite the Shema. The time has come to recite the Shema. So for the first verse, for the first verse in the first paragraph, they stop working and recite that paragraph, focusing on what they say, and then after that they can continue working while they are saying the rest, the other 2 paragraphs. They can work while they say the words. And even if they're on top of a tree or on the top of a building, it doesn't matter. It's fine. They can say the Shema wherever they are. If a person was learning and he was actually learning the verses of the Shema in the Torah, so is that as if they have prayed and said the verses, or because it's studying, so then maybe it wouldn't be fulfilling their mitzvah of reciting the Shema? So the Rambam says that as long as they had the correct intention while reading the first verse, so the rest would be okay while they are learning it. They fulfill the mitzvah of reciting the Shema. And if a person was studying Torah in general, and now comes the time to recite the Shema, and they're just learning something else, so then they have to stop and recite it. If a person was eating or drinking, or they were in the bath house, or taking a haircut, and now comes the time of reciting the Shema, so they should quickly finish off and then recite the Shema afterwards. And if they are able to stop because they're scared that the time of reciting the Shema will pass, because as we learned yesterday, that we can't just do it throughout the whole day. It's only up till 3 hours in the day. And now because the person is eating or taking a haircut, then it might drag a little bit, and then they're worried that they're going to miss saying the Shema, so then it's best, and it's definitely praiseworthy to stop and recite the Shema. Now, what about if a person wants to recite the Shema in its proper time, right as the sun rises, and right now they are going into a ritual bath, and they're going to maybe miss the time of reciting the Shema as the day breaks? So if they're able to get dressed and come up before sunrise, so then that's the best thing to do. But if they were worried that maybe the time of reciting the Shema will pass, so then they can cover themselves within the water, so that a person shouldn't be just naked, but to cover themselves even just with their hands in the water, and then to say the Shema. But it shouldn't. But if the water is totally clear, so then that's not good, because they are being seen, so to speak. The water is not covering because it's see-through. As long as there's no bad smell or anything in the water, but the water shouldn't be clear. And if the water is clear, so then definitely they should go out, put on a towel, and recite the Shema. When a person is reciting Shema, they need to have full concentration on what they are saying. And therefore, we should not gesture with our eyes, with our lips, or point with our fingers, so that we should be focused on what we're saying. And technically, it's still, even if we were involved in giving signs to someone and telling them, go, do this and that, so then we fulfill the mitzvah, but it's not proper. And we should recite the words verbally, and we should be able to hear what we're saying. And we have to make sure that when we're saying the words of the Shema, we say them properly. We should pronounce the letters and the words that we're saying properly, so that a certain word which is pronounced in a certain way should be said properly, and we shouldn't mix up the words or connect words and so on and so forth. And we should pronounce all the vowels properly, etc. And the person can actually read the Shema in any language, whether it's in Hebrew, if that's the language that they can understand and pronounce properly. And if not, it's okay. They can recite it in English or in any other language. And as long as we are saying the exact translation as it comes from the Lashon HaKodesh, from the Holy Tongue, so then that's okay. Now, a person should not recite the Shema out of order. Meaning you shouldn't take one verse and then say another verse from a different part and then another verse from somewhere else and make a whole mix-up, but rather we should read it in order. But if a person mixed up the paragraphs, so since it's full paragraphs, which actually come from different parts of the Torah, so then the Rambam said it should be okay. If a person reads it but stops in the middle, so they start reading Shema and then they stop, maybe they're spacing out, and then they continue reading, so it's fine. I mean, it's obviously best not to do it, but they have fulfilled their mitzvah. And similarly, also, if a person is not fully awake, but not fast asleep either, they're like in this hazy zone, so then, and they recite the Shema, as long as they said all the words, it's okay. As long as they're awake for the first verse and they know exactly what they're saying, the rest of the time is okay. Now, what about a person who is unsure whether they recited the Shema or not? So, if a person is unsure, then they should recite the entire Shema again. And if a person was reading the Shema and made a mistake in the middle and he's not sure, now he got confused at where they're holding, so then we should go back to the first paragraph of the Shema, to the beginning, so to speak. Similarly, if a person got mixed up in middle and now he said one verse and now he got mixed up if it's from the second paragraph or the first paragraph, so then go back to the beginning. Now, what about if a person was reciting the Shema and suddenly someone comes by and says, "Hey, my good friend, I haven't seen you in a long time." So if it's in between the chapters, so there are 3 paragraphs. So if it's between one of the paragraphs, so then we're allowed to answer them back. If someone greets us, we're allowed to answer them back. But we are not allowed to greet people, to initiate the greeting, unless it was their father or their great teacher or someone that was a great scholar. But if it's within the paragraphs, then we should not reply to anyone who greets us, and unless it's a person's father or teacher, etc. But we are allowed to greet someone if it was like a king or someone of very great stature, someone who we are in awe or afraid from afraid from, so then we would be allowed to do that. And these are the split ups of the paragraphs. He says the first is so we have the blessings before the actual Shema. So we have the first blessing, one pause, second blessing, pause. Then we have the Shema with the first paragraph. Then there's a pause over there. That's the end of that paragraph. Then we have the second paragraph, pause, and the third one. So in other words, it's all split up according to the paragraphs. At any one of those points, a person would be able, depending on the law, greet someone or answer a greeting, etc. But at the end of the Shema, when we finish saying the chapter of the Tzitzit, which is the third paragraph, so then we go on from there to another paragraph where we say how all of this is truth and faithful, and at that point, between the third paragraph and the blessing after the Shema, we should not stop, because the word emet, which means truth, is how the next blessing begins after the Shema, and we should not have a separation between the end of the Shema and the blessing afterwards. So that is the laws of how a person is supposed to recite the Shema, what we're supposed to focus on and make sure that we're doing properly, and what is a proper way of reciting the Shema. So this is what we're learning about these days. Very fascinating laws. These are very practical. Shema is a mitzvah which we do twice a day, so it's very special. All right, my friends, this is the end of today's chapter. We will see you tomorrow.